We help people with planning ahead, including our new Advanced Healthcare Directive, which Emir Hashem will be able to present next month with your group. And we also have many, many educational resources in which we try to teach people all sorts of different issues and questions that they can have with regard to end of life care. And you can read about that all here on our site. It's really, it's been a tremendous, I guess, pleasure to be able to speak, and honor to speak with people about these types of issues. But where it really gets, I think, very important for us is that we don't only want to be about planning for medical situations or acute situations. One of the things we're really working on is trying to get Jews to confront questions of mortality and to think about mortality in a meaningful manner, in a way in which we can confront it. We all have to address these issues for ourselves and for our loved ones, and to think about how we can make our life most meaningful to the age 120. And so some of our educational resources are precisely dedicated to thinking about those types of orientations towards mortality. Earlier this year in Elul, we had a whole project in which we highlighted the story of Dr. Dodi Tobin, Zechrona Livracha, who unfortunately passed away from cancer, but had a really tremendously moving experience and teaching experience, as it were, for very many people about how she confronted her own mortality. And that's one of the many ways we want to speak about these issues, including confronting some of the cultural barriers that we have about speaking about mortality. But certainly one of the most meaningful things that the Jewish tradition has when it comes to thinking about mortality is this idea of leaving a legacy, of the teachings that you want to pass on to your family members and to your friends or relatives. It can be a lot of different ways and a lot of different types of audiences and people. And really, this started with Yaakov Avinu when he left his message to the 12 tribes in Perek Memtet of Bereshit. But for many, many generations, Jews have been writing and leaving sort of ethical wills, or sometimes known as, but there are many different ways of thinking about it. And so about 6-7 months ago, I got reconnected to Daphne Raskus. We know each other from various different places, and I think I taught a couple of her kids and whatnot. We got reconnected, and it was really exciting to see someone who was taking initiative on trying to get Jews to think about some of the questions we're interested on, and providing a real service to giving a tool about how people can think about and frame these issues of legacy letters and what you can leave for others. And I can only tell you that from my conversations with Daphne and many others, how inspiring it is when you see people leave such letters. I know I live here in Israel. I'm sure you've seen some of the letters that soldiers have left behind. It's been truly remarkable, but many others. And in fact, I met with a woman about 4 or 5 months ago who has now kind of her 13 grandchildren, and she writes one every time there's a new grandchild born. And so she's going to leave behind like a whole book of these types of messages for her family, and it's really tremendous. And so really just pleasure to have Daphne with us. And Daphne, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi Brody and Audrey, for inviting me to join this important Eimatai Bikur Cholim Advanced Planning Workshop series, and to Rachel Sakanda for her technology assistance. Just this past week, we had relatives who needed the Bikur Cholim room at a local hospital, and so I can tell you firsthand how helpful Bikur Cholim is on multiple occasions. And Eimatai holds a special place in my family's heart because Eimatai used to be the Halachic Organ Donor Society, and my mother-in-law received a kidney. So we are all interconnected in wonderfully helpful ways. I want to thank all of you for joining me this morning. You should all be muted, and if you have any questions, Rachel is going to be monitoring the chat, and we are going to be leaving some time for questions at the end. So with that, please raise your hand if you've experienced the loss of someone you love without any warning and didn't get to say goodbye to them. Raise your hand if you feel like you had much more to learn from that person or people. Raise your hand if you wish you could have one more conversation with that person, or with someone who can no longer have a conversation with you. Raise your hand if it would mean so much to you if you discovered that that person had taken the time to write you a letter about themselves, what was important to them, or how much you meant to them, and that letter suddenly appeared. Most of us raised our hands to most of those questions. Now raise your hand if you've received such a letter from someone you love. A few, not so many. All of us have experienced the awful pain of losing someone unexpectedly. Most of us have experienced the anguish of losing someone far too young. It almost goes without saying, because it's on all of our minds, that thousands of Israelis now need to raise their hands to those questions because they have lost a parent, a child, a grandparent, a sibling in the past 4 months alone. Some of them would even raise their hands to the last question because they have received farewell letters written to them on the eve of battle, letters no one wants to receive, but that everyone treasures. People ask me why I give these workshops, and on passing along our values and what's been important to us. And I've done a lot of work. I've done a lot of work on nurturing and sustaining values in nonprofits and family businesses. And like so many of you, I have lost family and friends far before their time. I have also watched as my mother, may she live and be well, has lost the ability to communicate with us. All of this has made me intensely aware that our time to convey what we want to convey and what's important to us, to our loved ones, can be a lot more limited than we think, and that we should take every opportunity to do so. I've also seen how much we yearn to have any kind of connection to our loved ones. When I do legacy letter workshops in person, I ask people to bring an object, some object that was given to them by someone who's no longer with them. And I do that because I want to remind people of the sentimental value of objects and the sentimental attachment that we have to the people who gave them. So think about an object that you would bring. People have brought a siddur, a sefer, a talis, candlesticks, menorah. Somebody came in a heavy winter coat, which it turned out their grandfather had given them. Jewelry. Jewelry is a common one. A lot of women have jewelry that was given to them by loved ones. So I often share this desktop calendar. It still works. It was given to me by my grandfather, Nathan Footer, Zichrono Livracha. He brought it for me during one of his winter stays at the Saxony Hotel, which I'm sure some of you may recall, in Miami. It was probably the only gift that I received from him that he himself purchased. He used a Band-Aid to write a note to me on it. On the bottom, I don't know, it's very, very faded, but it says, Daphne Darling, 2/10/1980, in his very memorable script handwriting. He only used to come to us for Shabbos after my grandmother died because he didn't want to be a burden on anyone. And what else do I remember about him? When I look at this calendar, in his 80s, he used to walk uphill to a nursing home to read books to blind people. And he volunteered to polish the atarot of Sifrei Torah at the shtibel around the corner from my house. He left a legacy of humility and selflessness. That's who he was. But I don't have anything else from him. No gifts, no letters. During COVID, my husband and I did this huge house purge and got rid of a lot of stuff. But I couldn't part with this plastic, tangible reminder of my grandfather. There are a lot of things that mean a lot to us, not because they're financially valuable, but often because they provide that connection to someone who meant a lot to us and who cared a lot about us. I have found myself replaying and saving voice notes from people who have died just to hear their voices. Dodi Tobin, who Shlomo mentioned before, is one of those people. After hearing about the death of a close childhood friend, I once spent hours sorting through a box of cards and memorabilia, looking for something from her. And after a long time, I finally found a birthday card with a long note that she had written to me many years before. You know, it meant a lot to me, just having that connection. I'm not alone in doing those kinds of things. You know, we grasp to find things that connect us to the people that we love. And we especially value the written word, even more so when it's written for us. But these days, I wonder, you know, how many of us even send birthday cards anymore? More likely, we send a text, you know, we Zoom, we do all kinds of things, but the written word isn't around so much. And if we do send a birthday card, we just write love so and so. We're not writing, you know, letters to people anymore in the same way. And what does that mean? That means that most of our grandchildren aren't even going to have letters from us that they can save unless we make a point of writing them. Let's listen to Praturi Lakshmi, a CEO, entrepreneur, and speaker, on her TED Talk about the letters that her father sent her.
My father left me a legacy of his handwriting through letters and a notebook. In the last 2 years of his life, when he was sick, he filled a notebook with his thoughts about me. He wrote about my strengths, weaknesses, and gentle suggestions for improvement. quoting specific incidents, and held a mirror to my life. After he died, I realized that no one writes to me anymore. Handwriting is a disappearing art. I'm all for email in thinking while typing, but why give up old habits for new? Why can't we have letter writing and email exchange in our lives? There are times when I want to trade all those years that I was too busy to sit with my dad and chat with him, and trade all those years for one hug. But too late. But that's when I take out his letters and I read them. And the paper that touched his hand is in mine, and I feel connected to him. So maybe we all need to leave our children with a value legacy and not a
A legacy is something of value passed down from someone who came before us. It's something that connects us. So it could be a monetary gift, a valuable possession, a beloved object, but it can also be intangible wealth that can mean even more and be passed down for generations and generations to come. A gift of your values, lessons learned, family stories, life lessons, blessings, hopes, dreams. According to Rabbi Sachs in Letters to the Next Generation, the most important legacy we can leave our children is not money or possessions, but spiritual ideals. Legacy letters are a very powerful way to fortify the spiritual ideals that we give our children. It's also a way to leave behind something for future generations who may not get to know us as well. So legacy letters, what are they? They're just personal written documents or recordings, you can certainly record them, that are intended to be given to family, friends, or your community while you are still alive or after your death. A legacy letter that you write can become the last tangible thing that connects you to someone that you loved. Blake Brewer is a minister from Tulsa, Oklahoma. He's committed his life to getting 1 million dads to write legacy letters because of the legacy letter he received from his dad.
Starts with how his life changed in an instant on a family vacation when he was 19.
Just me and my dad standing on the beach. We're about to go snorkeling. And he looks down at me with this big smile. And he said, "Man, I'm glad you're out here with me." And we put on the snorkel gear and headed out in the water. And pretty soon we got to a pretty deep spot. And the current was really strong. And my dad started to struggle.
Blake was able to swim his father, Larry Brewer, to shore, but after CPR attempts to save his life were unsuccessful, he was pronounced dead, leaving Blake in a state of shock.
I'm back in the condo, and my mom appeared in the doorway, and she said, "I found something in your dad's briefcase that I know he was going to give you on this trip."
It was a letter from his dad that he'd been working on for months, and the words in it would change the course of Blake's life. Were there lines that stood out to you that still stand out to you?
My dad wrote, "As you're being faithful to the Bible, you're often going to find yourself in the minority. But I assure you that in heaven, you'll be in the majority. Love your dear old dad."
That line influenced Blake to follow a path into ministry, and in 2020 to start an organization called the Legacy Letter Challenge, with the goal of helping 1 million dads write a letter to their child like the one he had received from his dad.
But if you
A legacy letter is something of value passed down. Oh, sorry. I don't know. A legacy letter can be a very powerful gift, as it was for Blake. But actually sitting down to write one can be extremely overwhelming. Figuring out what you want your message to be, it's just a daunting task. But here's the good news. The experience of writing one is actually pretty freeing. Anyone can write it, and let's face it, you get to choose when you want it to be shared. You can choose it to be shared after you die, which is what most of us think about when we think about legacy letters, but you can also share it while you're still alive. How often do we get to write letters where you don't need anyone else to write it, to notarize it, or bless it? You don't even need to have your spouse look at it. No one else is part of it if you don't want them to be. Low tech in this case is even better than high tech. Handwritten letters are better in a sense than those that are typed. If your handwriting is messy, you can always just add a handwritten signature. But there's something very powerful about holding something that someone has written to you still today. You have complete freedom to choose the contents of the letter, and you can change it at any time while you're still capable of doing so. So let's say you write it today and your circumstances change. You can just change it. No one needs to know about what was written before. Now for the bad news. We don't actually intend to write a legacy letter today. It's just the beginning of the process. It is too difficult to get started without taking some time to think about what you want your message to be. And that can be hard. Writing a legacy letter can bring forth wonderful memories, but it can also trigger some very difficult ones. Feelings of guilt, vulnerability. Some relationships are very loving, others are more complicated. Sometimes things get left unsaid. The power of last words can be soothing, but they can also be guilt-provoking. There's a lot to think about here. But I will tell you that the act of completing a legacy letter for a loved one tends to be very fulfilling and very satisfying for those who stick with it. It can be a powerful and comforting gift to its recipients as well. In this session, we're going to begin this process of writing a legacy letter or ethical will. First, we're going to look at a framework for things to think about when you write your letter. And then we're going to discuss the Jewish tradition of ethical wills and look at some examples. I'm also going to ask you along the way to answer a few prompts. The prompts are meant to be sparks, just to begin to get you thinking about what's important to you and why, what kinds of messages you want to leave. Some prompts are going to be easier than others. I recommend just put whatever first comes to mind. At the end, we will be sending out a list of the prompts and some of the PowerPoints. And so you can always go back and make changes. Here is your first prompt. Please take a few minutes to name 3 things that you learned from your grandparents or someone of their generation. Okay, now please name 3 things that you learned from your parents. And now I'd like to share a framework for thinking about how we're going to write our legacy letter. So what I've done here is we've got your 5 W's and an H. Who? Who is your intended audience, and in what capacity are you writing to them? Are you writing to a child, to a spouse, to your parents, friends, or your community? Something has happened on my screen here. Rachel, can you tell me if you are still with me? Because my screen.
Yes. Yeah, we
Okay.
can hear you.
And I'm just going to go on. You need to decide if you're writing to your children. Are you going to write one letter to all of your children, or are you going to write each of your children separately? Do you want to do a hybrid model where you write one letter and then you have a separate, extra few paragraphs for each child? Think about what the recipient's age is. Are they ready to receive your letter? When will they be ready? If you're writing your letter now and you have young children, then you're writing it knowing that they may be much older by the time that letter is received. So you just want to give it some thought. You can always, mark the letters to be given at a certain age, or you should just bear in mind that they may be reading your letters, now or in 30 years from now. There's a funny story that I read about a guy who went to the funeral of a friend's father, and he was sitting as his friend eulogized his father, and he took out some letters from his pocket and read some very powerful letters that his father had sent to him when he was in camp as a kid. So this guy goes home and decides, I want to do something like that. And he sits and he writes powerful letters to his 2 twin daughters who are at camp, and he sends them off. But he doesn't hear back from the girls. And then they come home from camp and he says, "So did you get my letter?" And they kind of look at each other and they say, "Yes." And he says, "Well, do you mind giving it to me? I want to make a copy of it," because he's trying to get a sense what they thought of the letter. And it turns out they look at each other and they say, "We don't have it. We threw it away. It was really kind of weird." We write things now. We have all these ideas about these, what we want to pass on to our kids, but they may not be ready for those messages. So something to bear in mind. Are there other people that you want to mention in your letter? Guiding lights, people who have been your mentors. So the next prompt is actually to name a person that has been a role model for you. And in a sentence or two, write why. Okay, what is your letter going to look like? I read somewhere that the average legacy letter is a document between 2 to 5 pages, but it can also just be one paragraph or a collection of several letters. It could be a box with a letter and some other mementos inside, like favorite recipes or a favorite sefer. You can be as creative with this as you like. One father that I really liked, he wrote a letter to his unborn child. It's kind of similar to what Brody was saying. He wrote a letter to his unborn child, and then another one on the eve of that child's bat mitzvah, another one on the eve of her wedding, and then the final letter he wrote was on the eve of her becoming a mother herself. And then he presented her with all 4 letters. When do you intend to write and share the letter? Do you want to write it now, or do you want to wait until you are closer to the end of your life? Unfortunately, many of us do that. We wait, we put it off, and then we're not able to write what we would have wanted to, or we can't write at all. Celebration letters are a specific kind of personal legacy letter, which can be written in any stage of life to commemorate important milestones, including religious events, becoming a parent or grandparent, marrying off a child, bar or bat mitzvahs, becoming an empty nester, retirement, any occasion that you want to mark. You can share these letters while you're still alive, or write them in honor of special events with the intent of having them shared after your death. My husband's grandmother used to write a poem for every family simcha. Unfortunately, it was like in the days before computers, so we don't have all of these poems saved. Otherwise, they would have made for a lovely book. We will take a look at a very powerful celebration letter that was written on the eve of the Pesach Seder in a little bit. When will you commit to finishing this letter by? Today, set a date on your calendar now and some reminders about when you're going to complete it. When you finish writing your first draft, set it aside for a few days, then review it and make whatever changes you want to make. Then put it away wherever you choose to store it and make sure that someone else is aware of its existence. Then put another date in your calendar. Put another date like in 5 years from now, making sure that you can take a look at it and still see if it's what you want to convey. Do you want to update it? Are any changes necessary? Where do you intend to write and store your letter? Try to write it somewhere quiet, free of interruptions. It could be added to your will, or it could be placed in a sealed manila envelope and placed in your nightstand. It could even remain on your computer as long as you leave instructions for how someone can retrieve it. How will the letter be shared? How will it be written? Do you want to leave a written message? Do you want to leave a recorded message? Do you want to follow a template? Now, this is, I've given some workshops and inevitably someone says, this is just so hard. Can't you just, tell us how to do it? What questions to answer? So the answer to that is yes, you can do that. And many people do. I'm going to provide you a simple 4-step template, but you can just Google this. There are lots of templates for legacy letters if that's the route you want to take. It's simple and straightforward, and some people find that's the only way they can really do this. The simple 4-step template that I like is starting out with a thank you, writing what you're grateful to that person for, lessons learned, 2 or 3 life lessons that life has taught you, what matters to you most, your values, and then in closing, sign off with something about your love for them. If you want, you can add a special saying or a poem, but it's short and sweet, but it does leave somebody with something tangible, of your love. Voice. Who will do the work of writing this letter? So someone once emailed me after a workshop and sent me a ChatGPT version of a legacy letter that they had written by inserting some prompts about themselves. And I have to say, it was actually quite good. And so I actually did the same thing. I put some prompts about myself and I read the legacy letter. And again, I thought it was a pretty good letter, but it lacked my voice. And in order to gain that connection that you're seeking, it has to sound like you. If it doesn't sound like you, it's not going to have the same desired effect. So ChatGPT may be good to get some thoughts from your prompts, but you really need to write it yourself if you want it to come off as you. Tone. This is an important one. It's a heavy topic, but it doesn't mean that your letter has to be heavy. You can inject humor into your letter, love. You should just think about what kind of tone you want to set. You know, whether it's loving, optimistic. A lot of people certainly end off their legacy letters in an optimistic way. Some people actually are writing very difficult legacy letters where they're unhappy with people. And so then they want to take more of a shaming or, tone of rebuke. But it's very important to kind of set the tone in your mind when you sit down to write the letter, because that is what's going to come off. And perhaps the most important question that people tend to grapple with, even before addressing these other ones, is why? Why are we writing this letter? When you know the why, you're able to figure out the themes that you want the letter to be about. Rachel, if you could share the why. Rachel?
Yeah, can you see I switched it? Is it growth or a lag?
Oh, okay. You know what? I can't actually see it. Something's funky with my screen, but I can continue. Okay. Compelling reasons to write legacy letters. There are many. I think the overarching reason to do that is because financial wills, which many people do tend to leave, are very impersonal. Nowhere in a legal will do you find a place where someone tells their stories, their life lessons, shares their love for their children, or hopes and dreams for their future, at least not in typical wills. But instead of your final words being the impersonal reading of your will in a legal, in a lawyer's office, your final words can be your thoughts, your love, and your values conveyed in a legacy letter. I have a list of about like 40 reasons to write a legacy letter. So I like to divide them into 3 categories. Okay, to share things that are important to us, to provide comfort, and to gain clarity and control. To share things that are important to us. Do we want to bequeath our values instead of just our valuables? So what's been most important to us in our lives? I'm going to do this next prompt here. What 3 values are most important to you? Please take 2 minutes to answer that question as best you can. Just top of mind, remember, you can always change it later. Not an easy question to answer. But if you take some time, you will be able to think through which values you would want to leave. Another thing that we want to do sometimes is to provide a link from past to future generations, to give our descendants a sense of their identity and purpose in life. Do we want to explain the meaning behind some of the financial arrangements in our will? Or share stories and life lessons and give advice? Share our hopes and wishes for the recipients? Lastly, in this category, do we want to state memorial and burial requests and describe how we want to be remembered? This is a big one. We don't think about it so much, but there are a lot of things that people do care about, whether it's being buried in Israel or some tradition that people want kept. To provide comfort, saying goodbye is really important. Letting people know how much you love them, how proud you were of them. Expressing gratitude, asking or offering forgiveness. Sometimes people want to express regrets. And this last one is one that recurs. I see it in so many of the ethical wills and legacy letters that I read, to give the recipient permission to go on living without us. It's a really big deal. When people read those words, it somehow helps to lift some of the burden, knowing that they not only sometimes have to go on, but that they have the blessings of the person to go on and to be joyous and to live their lives. To gain clarity and control, to give us the opportunity to take stock of where we are and our blessings, what messages we want to convey, and how we wish to be remembered. The process of thinking about your legacy and your values can be just as meaningful to the author to write as it is for the recipient to read. It also helps us to confront our mortality. Palliative care professionals today usually recommend to their patients to engage in this kind of legacy letter writing as a means of helping them to cope with end of life. More recently, I've come across another reason that is something that I can relate to gain a measure of control about this difficult topic. After October 7th, I heard a therapist speak about the importance of taking control of things that we can control, especially at a time when so much is out of our control. She was suggesting that we limit our screen time of the news and awful images that were coming out to certain times a day as a way of containing it and asserting control in our lives. It's got me thinking about gaining control with regards to the topic of death. We fear death in part because it is so out of our control. I believe that taking control of end-of-life matters while we can helps us not only to confront our mortality, but also to lead more meaningful lives today. Not surprisingly, people report that they feel a sense of relief and accomplishment when they finish things like appointing guardians for their kids, writing their wills, as well as doing, completing a healthcare directive, which is the topic of the next session in our series, which I highly recommend. It's very important. But the feeling of relief when you take these steps is really very important, and I think it really helps us to come to terms. So we reviewed a lot of reasons to consider writing legacies, and I think that the concept should especially resonate with us as Jews. Legacy letter writing has gained momentum in recent times through efforts like the ones that we saw in those videos. But as Jews, the concept of communicating our values across the generations is far from new. It should sound very familiar. In fact, it's Jews that gave the world a tradition of ethical wills, the first kind of legacy letter over 3,000 years ago. Passing our values from generation to generation has always been an inherent part of Judaism. We see it with Yaakov when he blesses his children and 2 of his grandchildren on his deathbed, giving them a special blessing, the grandsons at least, because he understood that their commitment was essential to Jewish survival. The words he uses with these grandsons have continued to live on through the blessing that we say Friday nights. Yaakov's blessings are the very first example we have of preparing for a Jewish death by getting our house in order, conveying to the next generation our wishes, our legacy, our hopes, blessings, and even in some cases, our rebuke. We see it continue with Moshe, who blessed the 12 tribes at the end of the Torah. We see it in Talmudic times when the Chachamim used to visit their sages on their deathbeds and ask them for words of wisdom. Gedolim and Rebbeim later wrote ethical wills to spiritually guide many of their followers after their death. One of the most famous ethical wills from the Middle Ages was that of Yehuda ibn Tibon to his son. It was over 50 pages long and filled with rebuke because the boy was not living up to his father's expectations. We can see it physically in a collection of ethical wills from Talmudic times through the beginning of the 19th century called Hebrew Ethical Wills, and it is by Israel Abraham. He coined that phrase, ethical will. Additional ethical wills that were inserted in this volume at a later date included ones written by women, non-religious individuals, Holocaust survivors, Israeli heroes and heroines like Hannah Sanish. The ethical wills written during the Holocaust, which I'm sure many of us have seen over the years, became especially important, I would say, because they served as a tool to help future generations understand how survivors could go on with faith, despite everything that had happened to them. We also see it in the tremendous investment that we put in our kids' education. Passing down our values is essential to us. Our Masorah is not only rooted in the past, but it goes forward with time to the next generation. There's a dialogue between the Jewish past and the Jewish future. I want to share a letter that I came across very recently that captures this obligation so powerfully. Some of you may have already read Rabbi Lopiansky's Pesach Letter to My Child, written over 10 years ago. My dear child, I'm just going to read excerpts from these letters. When you will see me at the Seder dressed in a kittel, your first question will be, why are you dressed like this? Because it is like Yom Kippur, a day of reckoning. First and foremost, we are human beings, creatures in the image of God, but we are also components of Klal Yisrael, links in a chain that started over 3,000 years ago and will make it to the finish line of the end of times. It is a relay race where a torch is passed on through all the ages, and it is our charge to take it from one before and pass it on to the one after. Tonight, we are being judged as to how well we have received our tradition and how well we are passing it on. There's a total of 132 people stretching from our forefathers in Egypt to us today, 132 people who had to pass on this heritage flawlessly, each with his own test of faith and each with one overriding and burning desire, that this legacy be passed unscathed to me, and one request of me, that I pass this on to you, my sweet child. And what is this treasure that they have given their lives for? What is in this precious packet that 132 generations have given up everything for? It is a great secret that man is capable of being a lot more than an intelligent primate, that the truth of an almighty God does not depend on public approval, and no matter how many people jeer at you, truth never changes, that the quality of life is not measured by goods, but by the good, and so on. This is what it means to live with God. I am the 133rd person in this holy chain. Remember that this is the treasure that I have passed on to you. You will be the 134th with the sacred duty to pass our legacy on to number 135. Pretty powerful. What a beautiful example of a legacy letter written for the celebration of Pesach. It is not surprising at all that he chose the Seder as his focus. The Pesach Seder, which has been celebrated for thousands of years, is in essence a dialogue between the generations. It is the most celebrated Jewish holiday, with generations gathering for the Seder each year to participate in the retelling of our history and tradition. The Haggadah tells the narrative of the Jewish people from slavery to redemption, highlighting the values of the Jewish people by using 15 simanim, 4 cups of wine, symbolic food, song, rituals, prayer, and of course, a big meal. The Haggadah has plenty of parts for everyone, from the youngest to the oldest, and it even includes parts for 4 very different kinds of children. Not surprisingly, the Haggadah has been referred to as the master story of the Jewish people. I think the Haggadah can be viewed as a national legacy letter embedded in our tradition to strengthen the social fabric of our people. It even gets read annually, much like someone who requests that their legacy letter get read on their yahrzeit. The official text of the Seder even ends on a hopeful note, a very optimistic note, with Lashana Haba B'Yerushalayim, the same way that many legacy letters also end on an optimistic note. If the Haggadah is our national legacy letter and our daily mitzvot reinforce our values, then it's a fair question to ask whether or not we need to even write legacy letters. After all, we have our mitzvot passed down to us. We know what our heritage is. And to that, I would say that the important thing about legacy letters for us is to affirm how important these traditions are for us. Okay, what makes them meaningful to us? What about particular mitzvot is meaningful for us? And to explain. We take it for granted, I think, sometimes that our children understand the significance of what we do every day. I've had people say to me, if I haven't conveyed my values to my children by now, then, what's the point? And to that, I would say a few things. Reinforcement in different ways and at different times is always important. Just because we think we told them a lot of things when they were growing up, A, doesn't mean that we said them the way we ideally would want to, and B, doesn't mean they were listening. We may not have spelled out certain things because they were too young to hear them. One thing that comes to mind is, mikvah. I didn't have in-depth conversations with my young daughters about mikvah. But there are other examples of things that are, just at a different age mean different things to you. And frankly, some mitzvot take on different meaning for us throughout our lives, and our children are only with us for a limited part of our lives. We also may be more reflective about certain practices as we age. And finally, we don't get to decide how long we live. And we don't know at what point we may not be able to pass this along. Ideally, I think anyone who has a child should start writing some kinds of legacy letters so that you can convey some of this to them. Legacy letters are also a wonderful opportunity to put down in writing any particular traditions and customs that your family has, that your parents or your grandparents instilled in you, so that we can continue to add to the rich tapestry of Jewish tradition. My in-laws began a lovely tradition where they give each grandchild, starting with the first grandchild, a Kiddush cup with their Hebrew name engraved on it. And thank God, I've just become a grandmother and intend to continue that tradition. With my dad's help, my mom made beautiful bar and bat mitzvah albums that she gave each grandchild. And in the album, it was really focused on our family history, both sides of the family's history, the child's history. She wrote about their personalities, and she gave them her blessings. I too hope to continue in that tradition. Unfortunately, my mom was only able to write this for 6 out of 11 of her grandchildren, and now we're kind of left trying to figure out how to make something for the other grandchildren from her. Passing on family lore can also include explanations for names. We spend a lot of time thinking about the names that we give our children. But oftentimes, people write speeches, they're on a computer sitting somewhere, and that gets lost, and no one has it in writing. So if you want, you can include that in your legacy letter as well. Things that have particular meaning to your family that you would like to pass down. So the next prompt is write about a family tradition that you would like your family to continue. Now I want to turn our attention to the different kinds of legacy letters and provide a bunch of examples. Older legacy letters took the form of ethical wills, which focused a lot on do's and don'ts. They tended to be more directive, which is why an ethical will is called a tzava'a, from the word tzav, to command. They were usually written to be shared after one's passing. So let's take a look at the most famous ethical will. It was the will of Shalom Aleichem, and it appeared in the New York Times in May 1916, the day after his funeral, as per his request. It also was read into the Congressional Record. His funeral was the largest funeral New York City had ever seen, over 150,000 people in attendance. His ethical will is a combination of last will and testament and ethical will, and it has a number of directive requests. He asks to be buried not amongst the aristocrats, but rather among plain Jewish laborers. He wants no titles of any kind to be placed on his gravestone and no monument. At my grave and throughout a whole year and every year on my yahrzeit, my remaining son, and if they be inclined, my sons-in-law should recite Kaddish for me. If they are not inclined, then let them assemble with my daughters, grandchildren, and good friends, and read my will and read aloud one of my really joyous stories in whatever language they understand best. And let my name be remembered with laughter rather than not mentioned at all. He begs his children to guard their Jewish descent, and he says if they want to join another religion, then they have erased themselves from my will. And finally, he begs his children to take care of their mother and to live together in peace, to bear no hatred for one another, to help one another in bad times, to remember one another upon occasion in the family, to have pity on a poor man, and when circumstances permit, to pay my debts, should I have any. Children, carry with honor my hard-earned Jewish name, and may God in heaven come to your help. Amen. Name one request now that you would like to make of your loved ones when you die. In more recent generations, the tradition of ethical wills has been reframed as an exercise in ensuring we are living in such a way that our values are clear to those we know and love. So these more modern ethical wills still have some do's and don'ts, but they're less about accounting and instruction, and they're more about imparting wisdom, values, and wishes, or simply reviewing one's life. Let's take a look at some of these more recent letters. Deborah Weizmann is a distinguished Israeli writer who made Aliyah in 1971. She writes frequently for the Jerusalem Post. I'm at an age where I should write a will, but the disposition of my material possessions would take just a few lines. They do not amount to much. Had we stayed in Australia, where you, my 4 children, were born, they would be much more. I have different things to leave you. I hope you will understand that you are more valuable than money in the bank, stocks and bonds and plots of land, for no one can ever take them away from you. I am leaving you the fragrance of a Jerusalem morning. I am leaving you an extended family, the whole house of Israel, your people. They will celebrate you with you in joy, grieve with you in sorrow. You will argue with them and sometimes reject them. That's the way it is with families. But underneath, you will be proud of them and love them. More important, when you need them, they will be there. I am leaving you the faith of your forefathers. Here, no one will ever laugh at your beliefs, call you a Jew as an insult. You can be as religious or as secular as you wish. You have your heritage, written with the blood of your people through countless generations. Guard it well and cherish it. It is priceless. I am leaving you pride. Hold your head high. This is your country, your birthright. Try to do your share to enhance its image. It may call for sacrifice, but it will be well worth it. Your children, their children, and all who come after will thank you for it. That was written in 1979, and I believe she is still writing. Clearly, making Aliyah was a seminal event in Devorah's life. Now name 1 to 3 events that shaped your life. Okay. And now, an ethical will by Sadie Kulikovsky, a Zionist, strong advocate of social justice, and an early champion of human rights. She came from Omaha, Nebraska. I hope and pray that during the years we have had together, I have given you a love of our faith, a trust in God from whom all blessings flow, a devotion to righteousness, to justice, and to peace, all of which one will find as the principles of Judaism and the basis of civilization. These are the jewels, more precious than rubies, which I hope will make your lives rich in all that is worthwhile for many years to come, as I think they have made mine. May God shower you with blessings, and may you share your blessings with others. Next slide. Next slide, please. Oh, here we go. This one is written by a businessman from New England, Samuel Lipsitz. Somewhere amongst these papers is a will made out by a lawyer. Its purpose is to dispose of any material things which I may possess at a time of my departure from this world to the unknown adventure beyond. I hope its terms will cause no ill will among you. It seemed sensible when I made it. After all, it refers only to material things which we enjoy only temporarily. I am more concerned with having you inherit something that is vastly more important. I hope you will live right. Live together in harmony, carry no ill will toward each other, help each other in case of need, honor and care for your mother. Carry your Jewish heritage with dignity, though you may discard trivial ritual things, never discard your basic Jewish faith. Being together daily in business has its disadvantage as far as a father wanting to be noble in the eyes of his children. Maybe we said things at such time that in calm retrospect we are sorry for. I was as guilty of these things as anyone. I must have done some worthwhile things that left good impressions and nice thoughts with you. Please recall these, or anything you feel worth carrying on the occasion of my yahrzeit. I leave with happy thoughts, because as your mother and I often said, God has been good to us. So don't mourn for me when I die. I have enjoyed my life. Carry on from here using the many blessings with which you have your wisdom and consecration to your family and humankind. You can service your family best by serving humankind also. Remember me affectionately as your father. So now please name 3 things that you are grateful for. Farewell letters are usually written by someone whose life is in danger or uncertain. Farewell letters have been written by people on the eve of surgery, people who have terminal illnesses, and soldiers on the eve of battle. Now I would like to read excerpts from an ethical will that is a farewell letter that is treasured by so many still until this day. Some of you may have known its author, Ruchama Damiel Klein. Others of us knew Max, her husband, and may know her children, Sarah, David, and Nehemiah. The family has given me permission to share it to honor her legacy, and I think it is our privilege to hear her words. Written in Houston, 4:30 a.m., May 5th, 1975. Dear husband, wonderful kids, and friends, God in his merciful way has given me a slower death so that I could have time to write to you of my feelings and my thoughts. My thoughts may be and are changeable, moving from great elation for a new day of life that was given to me, to thankfulness to you and your care, to questions of why I've had to leave this earth so young, to thoughts of a tremendous fear of death, to ignoring God altogether, to deep depression and then back again, to thoughts of a love of life, of an acceptance of death, and to a tremendous desire to convey my feelings to you. I see now that even if I would have hired a lawyer to write a will for me, he would have had very little work to do. Not that I despise material things. On the contrary, I have lived comfortably most of my life, but apparently I don't have much of material things to leave you in this realm. I was too much the daughter of my father, your sainted grandfather, children who desired not to present any outward wealth. Well, as it happens, I never really had any material wealth. The $10 wedding ring that you, Maxie, my beloved husband, and your father, my children, bought me, I always cherished. This I will leave it to you, Sarah. You don't have to wear it should you prefer a much prettier and more expensive ring. You are welcome to give it away. What then am I able to leave you? Very early in my sickness, I had an urge to write something to be read at my funeral. At first, I thought that was really crazy. But then one day, while searching for the meaning of sickness and death, I came across an article that described how Jews in earlier times used to write ethical wills. I read some of them and was elated. First, in writing such a will, I'm following the Jewish tradition, which is always an important thing to do. And second, in so doing, I'm not so crazy after all. I have so much I want to tell you that is hard for me to put into a short ethical will. A few important lessons stand out in my mind, lessons I have learned through the years and months of my long illness. Firstly, I couldn't have come to the wonderful feelings of resignation, acceptance, and thankfulness without the support and the help of you, Max, Mutek, my sweetheart. For this, I can only be thankful to God. The beauty of our relations was not as deep before my sickness as it was during it. When I was scared, you were reassuring. When I despaired, you were hopeful. I can't remember how many times you took me for a walk on Shabbat and told me over and over again to have hope, to live each day as it comes, to make an effort to communicate with the kids, to find other interests. You were with me day and night. Who else like you would have called up every doctor in the country that had anything to do with my sickness? Maxie, for this quality of love that you gave me, I am able now to leave you with peace. I would have liked to be around longer to be together with you, sweetheart, at our kids' weddings, but I have already tasted much happiness, thanks to God and to you. You have so much to give to others, Maxie, that I hope that after a period of grief and perhaps despair, you will find a good wife, and together you will be able to share God's work on earth. I hope that you wonderful children will see, like I did, the qualities of calmness, of great simplicity, and the willing to help everyone that were given to your father. Follow his footsteps if you can. Live with your wives and husband as if they were very sick, like I was, as if they will not be around too long. Only when you comprehend the shortness and finiteness of life will you be able to refine these relations, to deepen them, and to be able to stand together in all hours of sorrow. Dear Nemel, Duval, and Sarala, open your hearts to your father and to anyone that you trust and love. Your father and I always talk things over. Remember my desire for you to communicate with your fellow friends, not to hold things inside, but talk about your inner feelings and thoughts. Life becomes so much more beautiful and meaningful. Don't be afraid to cry when I'm gone, to shout, to ask why, to demand from God an answer, to be skeptical, to hold another loving hand, and to give a warm kiss and a hug. I wouldn't have lasted so long, and I would have been miserable and depressed had I not had the support of my truly good friends. I only wish my children that you will be able to make such good friends as I made during my life. These were trying times for all my good friends who had to see me slowly going the way of all flesh, but they all stood by me. What else can a human being want but to be able to call upon a friend in his hour of despair? Always to find him or her listening and comforting is a wealth that should be displayed at all times and places. This is then my will to you. Do to your friends what mine for so long did for me. Don't be afraid when people get sick and are dying. Help them, comfort them, listen to them, seek them. Give each person in need a hand, a touch, or an ear. This is why we are here, and this is why I say today to you, my beloved husband, children, and to all my wonderful friends. Thank you very much for so long you did for me. Continue your good deeds. There are plenty of others who are in need of your help. Simply amazing. But her last line is about others and not herself. The final slide is 22-year-old IDF Sergeant Major Ben Zussman. His farewell letter. He fell in battle in the Gaza Strip. Ben has relatives who live in Silver Spring, and I asked his cousin about him. She said Ben was a simple boy. Things did not come easy for him, including getting into a particular part of the Army. One thing that is very clear, however, is the clarity and the conviction that he definitely had about his country, a conviction that is so powerfully expressed here. I'm writing you this message on the way to the base. If you are reading this, something must have happened to me. I am happy and grateful for the privilege to protect our beautiful land in Am Yisrael. Even if something happens to me, I'm not permitting you to sink into sadness. I had the privilege to fulfill my dream and my purpose, and you can be sure that I am watching you and smiling a huge smile. If God forbid you sit Shiva, make it a week of friends, family, and fun. There should be food, meat, of course, beers, sweet drinks, seeds, tea, and of course, mother's cookies. Make jokes, tell stories, meet all my other friends. If Khalila I fall into captivity, dead or alive, I'm not willing for any soldier or civilian to be injured by some deal to free me. I've always said that if I have to die, I hope it will be in defense of others and our country. Another one beneath it actually was just from this past week. Very similar themes. They provide instructions and memorial requests. Interestingly, they tend to be more directive and commanding, like the ethical wills that we saw. Perhaps it's because they're written in more of an emotional state. They forbid their loved ones from sinking into sadness. They not only give them permission to continue on with their lives, but they command them to do so. Remarkable letters and incredibly powerful for their families. These men were so young, so young, but they shared such wisdom with their families. So the final prompt is to name 3 things that you've learned from your children or whichever loved one you want to write a legacy letter to. There's so much more to say, but I want to make sure I leave time for some questions. I wanted to end off on those farewell letters because they're not only powerful, I think there's something life affirming about these legacy letters. They leave us strengthened rather than just down and depressed. And I think that one of the things to do when you sit down to write your legacy letter is think about what kind of messages you can leave that will also have that kind of power for your loved ones. So with that, any questions?
First of all, I want to thank you, Daphna. That was an incredible workshop. I've taken a workshop with you and I learned more this time around, so I really appreciate it. I also wanted to, do you want people to unmute to ask you questions or to put them in the chat? Unmute. Okay.
Either way, yeah.
All right.
Daphne, I'll break the ice. Just, I'm curious about what you said about, first of all, thank you. That was very moving in a lot of different ways. I'm curious what you said about rebuke or like writing something that, you know, you were upset about, want them to know about, which I get worried about. That's like sort of like the lasting thing that people are going to have for 50 years or whatever it's going to be. I'm wondering if you could relate to that a little bit.
Right. I think that's a great question. I think that sometimes people think better to leave things alone. But when people don't have closure, it is really, really hard. And sometimes bringing up tough topics, even if they are not well received with some kind of explanation, may be more comforting than not bringing them up at all. I see not so much in the workshops I've given, but in literature that I've read, you know, there are a lot of family secrets that often get revealed in legacy letters. You know, there's so much that we don't know about people. You know, I think you can deliver some kind of rebuke and at the same time some measure of comfort. It doesn't have to be an or or none proposition. Yehuda Ibn Tiban's rebuke of his son was that he wasn't living up to his expectations. Well, there are different ways to deliver that message. That message can be delivered in a loving way. It can, you know, I think one of the things I've seen is just telling your child that they were enough for you. You know, parents have high expectations. And sometimes we forget that our kids may not realize that we just want them to succeed. What they hear from us is our expectations, and they always feel like they're not enough. So I think if you have things to say, if you think a child is not living up expectations in one area, try to find other areas that you can compliment and try to envelop your message with a lot of love so that that is what's taken. The reason I hesitate to call my workshops ethical will writing is because those messages tend to be harsher messages. They're commands. I prefer kind of the softer legacy letters because they tend to be more sharing rather than commanding.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
All right. Daphna, is there any way people could reach you after the workshop, or will you
Yes,
be able to
of course.
will you be sending out your PowerPoint?
I will be sending out the PowerPoints, and you can reach me at daphnaraskis@gmail.com.
Okay, I can put that in the chat as well in a minute.
Yes,
And okay.
please
And
feel
for
free.
those of you, since you all registered, your email addresses will be available to us soon, and then we could send you Daphna's PowerPoint. And once the recording has been uploaded and edited, hopefully that as well.
If no one has questions, I'll just say one last thing. It's not an easy thing to write, but in the next few weeks, this will be on your mind. And if you're thinking about it, you will start to get ideas of what you might want to say. One of the things that's helpful, which I don't think I focused on, is telling a story. If you have some powerful story, it doesn't even have to be something incredible. but just something that is meaningful to you that you want to share. Sometimes a story is a good way to, to bring in different things that are important to you. It could be a story about how, you met your spouse. It could be a story with one of your children, but sometimes that's a good way to bring people in and to start thinking about what it is that you want to share.
Okay, well, again, thank you so much. First of all, thank you to Dr. Raskus for an amazing presentation. Lot to process, and I'm sure that's what everybody is currently starting to do. And thank you very much to Rachel Secundo for expertly running this Zoom, much appreciated. And of course to Rabbi Dr. Shlomo Brody, Executive Director at AMATI. They have an amazing website. I encourage everybody to take a look at it. There's so much on there, so much we can all learn. And stay tuned for more information on the next session with Rabbi Brody on advanced directives. Very important information. February 25th, we'll send out, especially to everybody who registered for this, the information and Zoom link about that. And tentatively, there's a program quickly coming together for next Sunday that is on a completely different topic. It'll be with a different organization, Amudim, and that one will be about mental health resources and getting the support you need and starting to understand and learn about the landscape of what's available in the Jewish community to helping with mental health. More information to come via email about that program as well. So thank you, everybody, and I hope everyone has a wonderful day, and those of you in Israel, a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Audrey, for putting this all together and for everything you do for Bikur Cholim.
Thank you, Menachem. And I'd like to introduce Menachem Hamburger, who is a board member of Bikur Cholim of Greater Washington. And I neglected to really thank, and I'm glad you unmuted yourself, because he was a driving force behind getting this program off the ground and making the initial contacts with AMATI. Very much appreciated.